Radio silence, the other side. The red planet grows larger in the viewport with each passing hour. I adjust the Odyssey spacecraft's trajectory by a fraction of a degree, my fingers dancing across the control panel with practiced precision. 4 months of travel through the cold void has brought me here, to become the first human to orbit Mars.
Houston, this is Odyssey. Visual confirmation of Mars at approximately 800,000 kilometers. And closing. All systems nominal, I say, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I wait for the response, counting silently in my head. At our current distance, the radio transmission takes approximately 19 minutes to reach Earth, and another 19 for their reply to return to me. These long conversational pauses have become normal during the journey, stretching longer as the distance between Earth and the Odyssey increased. 38 minutes after my transmission, the response finally comes through. Odyssey, this is Houston. Copy visual confirmation. Trajectory looks good from our calculations. How's our boy doing up there? Mission Control Director Samantha Wright's voice carries its usual blend of professionalism and warmth. Ready to make history, Director Wright. My reflection smiles back at me from the viewport glass. At 42, the gray at my temples has been earned through 15 years with NASA and over 2,000 hours in space. But this mission dwarfs everything that came before. I know I'll need to wait another 38 minutes for her response, so I continue with my tasks. 4 months is a long time to spend alone in a tin can, but the view's about to make it worthwhile. While waiting, I glance at the family photos I've taped to the console. My parents, my sister, and her kids. No spouse, no children of my own. It's partly why they selected me. No immediate family means fewer complications, fewer emotional entanglements. The psychological profiles deemed me uniquely suited to extended isolation. I run a hand through my close-cropped hair, remembering the final psychological evaluation before mission approval. Commander Foster displays exceptional emotional stability and self-sufficiency, Dr. Patel had written. His capacity to maintain focus and mental equilibrium during extended periods of isolation exceeds all other candidates. What Dr. Patel's report didn't mention was the reason behind that capacity. I learned self-reliance early, growing up as a military brat, constantly relocating as my father, Colonel James Foster, received new postings. By the time I graduated high school, I'd lived in 11 different cities. The communication delay means conversations happen in disjointed chunks, with each party sending complete thoughts rather than the natural back and forth of real-time dialogue. Over the months of travel, I've gotten used to this rhythm, speaking, working while I wait, receiving a response that's already more than half an hour old, then sending my reply to continue the cycle. When Samantha's response comes through, it's exactly what I expect. Copy that, Commander. The whole world is watching. President's scheduled to make a statement after you complete your first orbit. Commencing pre-orbital checklist, I say, though I know she won't hear this for 19 minutes. The mission timeline allocates 6 hours for final approach preparations, each procedure meticulously designed and rehearsed over thousands of hours in simulators. I move through the checklist with methodical precision. Propulsion systems, nominal. Life support, optimal. Power generation, steady. Communications array, fully functional. Navigation systems, calibrated and cross-checked. The Odyssey has performed flawlessly throughout the journey, a testament to the engineers who designed and built her. Houston, pre-orbital checklist items 1 through 17 complete. All systems green, I report, taking a moment to stretch in the confined space of the command module. During the long wait for her response, I review the orbital insertion parameters on my display, double-checking the calculations. This is the critical maneuver of the entire mission. Achieving stable orbit around Mars, there's no room for error. 38 minutes later, Samantha's voice returns. Copy that, Odyssey. You're ahead of schedule as usual, Commander. We've got a pool going down here about whether you'll beat the estimated insertion time by 5 or 10 minutes. I smile. Tell Kowalski if he's betting against me again, he's going to lose his lunch money. Last time I checked, I was the one who set the record for fastest pre-launch sequence. As I wait for her response, I continue with my preparations. The casual banter helps ease the tension. Behind the light conversation lies the weight of billions of dollars in technology and the hopes of an entire planet. The Odyssey mission has captured global imagination in a way no space endeavor has since the Apollo program. Schools worldwide have incorporated the mission into their curricula. News networks maintain continuous coverage. For a brief moment, humanity has united in looking outward rather than at its own divisions. He remembers, comes Samantha's delayed response. That's why he's betting on 10 minutes this time. As I work through the checklist, my thoughts drift to the journey that brought me here. The Odyssey launched from Kennedy Space Center on a clear Florida morning, riding a column of fire into the sky. The massive Saturn VI rocket, developed specifically for deep space missions, performed its task with thunderous efficiency. After reaching Earth orbit, the spacecraft's nuclear thermal propulsion system activated, providing the continuous acceleration necessary to reach Mars in just 4 months, rather than the 9 months required by conventional chemical rockets. The system uses superheated hydrogen propellant, carefully shielded to protect its sole occupant, me, from radiation. I remember watching Earth shrink in my viewport during those first days, the blue marble receding until it became just another bright point in the black sky. I had expected to feel something profound, perhaps loneliness or existential awe. Instead, I found a strange comfort in the solitude and purpose of my mission. The pre-orbital checklist continues with the verification of the scientific instruments that will gather data during my Mars orbit. The spacecraft carries a suite of cameras, spectrometers, radiation detectors, and atmospheric analysis tools, each representing the pinnacle of human technological achievement. Houston, science package diagnostics complete. All instruments calibrated and ready for data collection. I report, moving to the next section of my checklist. Even after months of these delayed conversations, there's still something strange about speaking into the void, knowing my words won't reach their destination for nearly 20 minutes. I continue working while I wait, knowing that by the time I receive a response, I'll be several steps further in my preparation sequence. This desynchronized communication requires meticulous planning. Each message must anticipate what information will be needed almost 40 minutes in the future. Eventually, Samantha's reply arrives. Excellent work, Commander. JPL scientists are practically bouncing off the walls down here. 4 months of travel for 8 days of orbital data collection. Let's make it count. I smile at the thought of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory team's excitement. I spent months training with them, learning the intricacies of each instrument and the specific data they hope to gather. Some of the scientists have devoted their entire careers to Mars research, relying on remote probes and rovers until now. The Odyssey mission will provide unprecedented data about Mars's atmosphere, surface conditions, and potential for future human missions. Tell them I've got the steady hands to get their money shots, I reply, typing commands to perform final calibrations on the high-resolution camera system. I pull up the orbital insertion parameters on my main display, reviewing the precise calculations once more. The Odyssey will enter a highly elliptical polar orbit, allowing it to observe most of the Martian surface over the course of its 8-day mission. The orbit has been calculated to minimize fuel requirements while maximizing scientific return. Houston, I'm beginning final approach to orbital insertion, T-minus 78 minutes until radio blackout, I announce. I've adjusted my timeline to account for the signal delay. I need to give them this information well in advance so they can prepare on their end. The radio blackout is an unavoidable consequence of orbital mechanics. Once the Odyssey passes behind Mars relative to Earth, direct radio communication will become impossible until the spacecraft emerges from the planet's shadow. During those 17 minutes, I'll be more isolated than any human in history, separated not just by distance, but by an entire planet blocking communications. I'm already running final trajectory calculations when Samantha's reply eventually comes through. Copy that, Odyssey. We'll be holding our breath down here. Communications blackout expected to last approximately 17 minutes while you're on the far side. Running final trajectory calculations, I report, my fingers moving over the touchscreen displays with practiced efficiency. The Odyssey's onboard computer can handle most of the calculations, but mission protocol requires human verification of critical maneuvers. My training has prepared me for every aspect of the mission, from the technical procedures to the psychological challenges of extended isolation. The mission designers incorporated lessons learned from previous space expeditions, particularly the psychological effects observed in International Space Station astronauts during long-duration missions. My daily routine includes not just scientific and operational tasks, but also scheduled periods for exercise, leisure, and psychological maintenance. The spacecraft contains a small library of digital books, music, and films, though I've found myself too focused on the mission to use them much during the outbound journey. The communication delay creates a strange rhythm to the work. Each message is a capsule of information from the past, sent by people reacting to statements I made over half an hour ago. It requires a mental adjustment, a way of holding multiple parallel conversations in my head at once. T-minus 68 minutes to blackout, I announce, completing another set of checks. Orbital insertion burn calculations verified, attitude adjustment commencing. The spacecraft's thrusters fire briefly, adjusting its orientation for the upcoming main engine burn. I feel the gentle push against my restraints as the Odyssey aligns itself precisely with the calculated insertion trajectory. Attitude adjustment complete and verified, I report. Engine pre-start sequence initiated. While I wait for any final instructions from Houston, I allow myself a moment to gaze at Mars through the viewport. The rust-colored sphere has fascinated humanity for centuries, inspiring stories of canal-building civilizations and invading Martians. The reality, as revealed by decades of robotic exploration, is both less romantic and more scientifically intriguing. A cold, dusty world with a thin atmosphere, but one that might once have harbored conditions suitable for life. Eventually, Samantha's delayed response arrives. Copy that, Odyssey. Telemetry confirms optimal positioning. You're right on the money, Commander. The spacecraft's sensors are already gathering data, measuring the properties of the sparse outer Martian atmosphere as the Odyssey approaches. Initial readings appear on my secondary display, showing trace gas compositions and density measurements that will help refine models of the Martian atmosphere. Houston, all instruments are actively collecting approach data, I report. Preliminary readings match expected parameters. I check the mission clock, 55 minutes until blackout. The final approach sequence is running smoothly, each step falling into place with practiced precision. Despite having rehearsed this procedure countless times in simulators, the reality of orbiting another planet sends occasional shivers of excitement down my spine. My thoughts turn briefly to the historical significance of this moment. Humans have sent machines to Mars for decades, orbiters, landers, rovers, but never before has a person seen the red planet with their own eyes from this vantage point. I am about to join the ranks of explorers like Columbus, Magellan, Armstrong, those who ventured beyond the known boundaries of their time. T-minus 50 minutes to blackout, I report. Main engine preheating sequence complete. Power systems configured for orbital insertion burn. I run through a series of mental exercises Dr. Patel taught me for maintaining focus during critical operations. Deep breath in through the nose. Hold for 4 seconds. Release slowly through the mouth. Visualize the sequence of events. Anticipate contingencies. Trust the training. The spacecraft's environmental systems hum steadily around me, cycling air, regulating temperature, removing carbon dioxide, keeping me alive in the vacuum of space. After 4 months aboard the Odyssey, these sounds have become as familiar as my own heartbeat. During the long wait for Houston's response, I continue the methodical preparation process. Each system must be verified, each parameter confirmed, each potential contingency anticipated. The delay makes the process even more demanding. By the time I receive confirmation or new instructions, I need to have already moved several steps forward. "Copy that, Commander," comes Samantha's eventual reply. "Everything's looking nominal from down here." T minus 40 minutes, I say, initiating final systems verification. My fingers move through the practice sequence, confirming that each of the spacecraft's critical systems is ready for the orbital insertion maneuver. The nuclear thermal engine shows optimal temperatures and pressure levels. Reaction control thrusters report full functionality. Guidance systems have been triple-checked. Nearly 40 minutes later, Houston's response arrives. "Odyssey, this is Houston. We're seeing nominal telemetry across all channels. You are go for orbital insertion." "Copy that, Houston. Odyssey is go." I feel a surge of pride at the professionalism in my voice, masking the combination of excitement and tension building inside me. The next 30 minutes pass in a blur of final preparations. I verify emergency procedures, ensure backup systems are ready, and configure the automated scientific suite to continue operations during the blackout period. T-minus 10 minutes to blackout, I report. Orbital insertion sequence loaded and verified. All systems remain nominal. Mars fills more of my viewport now, its surface features becoming clearer. I can distinguish the massive shield volcano Olympus Mons rising above the Martian plains, and the vast canyon system of Valles Marineris stretching across the planet's face. I know this will be my last communication before entering blackout, as any response from Houston won't reach me until after I've already emerged from the far side of Mars. Beginning countdown to engine ignition, T-minus 7 minutes and counting. Next contact will be after blackout. Odyssey out. The spacecraft's computer takes over the precise timing of events, though I remain ready to intervene if necessary. My hand hovers near the manual override controls, a human backup to the automated systems. T-minus 5 minutes to engine ignition. All systems remain green. I feel my heart pounding against my ribs, the culmination of years of training and months of travel about to unfold. Engine ignition in 3, 2, 1. The nuclear thermal engine roars to life, pushing me back into my seat with gentle but insistent force. The acceleration is nowhere near what I experienced during the Earth launch, but after months of weightlessness, even this modest push feels significant. Engine burn nominal, I record in my mission log. Thrust and alignment within parameters. As the final seconds tick down to blackout, I find myself reflecting on the journey that brought me here. Not just the 4-month spaceflight, but the lifetime of preparation leading to this moment. The childhood spent looking at stars, the Air Force career that taught me discipline and precision, the NASA selection process that tested every aspect of my capabilities. Entering blackout now, I note in my log, all systems nominal. The radio falls silent as the bulk of Mars comes between me and Earth. For the first time since launch, I am truly alone, cut off from mission control and the rest of humanity by the mass of an entire planet. I focus on monitoring the orbital insertion burn, watching as the engine performs exactly as designed. The spacecraft's velocity gradually decreases, allowing Mars' gravity to capture the Odyssey in its embrace. The planet's surface slides beneath me, features I've only seen in photographs from probes and rovers now visible through my viewport. Recording engine performance for post-blackout analysis, I say into my personal log. 4 minutes, 27 seconds burn completed as planned. Telemetry shows successful orbital insertion. The engine shuts down precisely on schedule, leaving me in silence, broken only by the environmental systems and the occasional chirp of the instrument package. I verify the spacecraft's trajectory, confirming that we've achieved the planned elliptical orbit. Now recording scientific observations, I continue, activating the high-resolution camera system. capturing surface imagery of the Western Hemisphere, Olympus Mons visible and prominent. I busy myself with the scientific mission, knowing that every second of observation is precious data. The Odyssey's instruments scan the Martian atmosphere, measure radiation levels, analyze surface compositions, and capture detailed imagery of features never before seen by human eyes. The minutes pass as I work through the blackout checklist. According to my chronometer, the communications blackout should end in approximately 2 minutes. I gather my initial findings, ready to transmit the most important data first once communication is reestablished. Preparing for reacquisition of signal, I note in my log, all systems remain optimal. Orbital parameters confirmed within 0.02% of planned trajectory. 1 minute passes, then another. I check my communications display, which shows no incoming signal, but I'm not concerned yet. Houston would need time to detect my emergence from blackout and send a response. Houston, this is Odyssey. Radio blackout complete. Orbital insertion successful. Do you copy? I transmit the message, knowing it will take 19 minutes to reach Earth, and another 19 for any response to return. I continue with my tasks, documenting the data collected during blackout. Transmitting blackout data packet. Initial analysis shows expected atmospheric composition, with some interesting variations in the upper stratosphere. After the full 38-minute round-trip communication time passes with no response, I begin to feel the first flicker of concern. Houston, this is Odyssey, confirming successful orbital insertion. All systems nominal. Please confirm receipt of telemetry data. I run a quick diagnostic on the communications array. The system reports full functionality. Running communications system check, I report, even as I continue to wait for the delayed response to my earlier transmission. After another full communication cycle with no response, my concern deepens. This is unusual. Houston should have acknowledged my emergence from blackout by now. Houston, this is Odyssey. Communications check. Do you read me? I wait through another complete round-trip delay. Still nothing. My training kicks in. I begin the communications troubleshooting protocol, methodically checking each component of the system. Initiating communications system reboot, I record. Possible software anomaly during blackout. The system cycles down, then back up, running its self-diagnostic routines. The display flashes green across all components. System reports nominal functionality, attempting alternate frequencies. I cycle through the backup channels, repeating my call on each one. The silence continues. After 2 hours of attempting contact, enough time for multiple round-trip communications, I begin to consider contingencies. A simultaneous failure of all ground stations seems improbable. More likely, the issue is on my end, despite what the diagnostics reported. Deploying backup communications array, I decide, initiating the sequence that will extend the secondary antenna. The mechanism hums as it extends the dish from the spacecraft's hull. I watch the status indicators, which show successful deployment. Switching to backup array. Houston, this is Odyssey on backup systems. Do you copy? The stars stare back at me, indifferent to my growing concern. Mars continues its silent rotation beneath me, red and resolute. After 3 hours of troubleshooting with no response, I force myself to step back and think. The mission protocols are clear. Maintain orbit, continue scientific observations, and attempt contact at scheduled intervals. If no contact is established within 24 hours, I would need to consider the abort contingency. Recording status update. I speak into my personal log. 3 hours, 17 minutes since expected reacquisition of signal. All communication attempts unsuccessful. Spacecraft systems functioning normally. Continuing scheduled orbital operations while troubleshooting continues. I turn my attention back to the scientific mission. Whatever the communication issue, I still have a job to do. The data will be valuable, whether transmitted immediately or returned physically to Earth. The hours pass with mechanical precision. I complete my first full orbit, then a second, all the while attempting contact at regular intervals. when not engaged in mission tasks, I pore over the communication system schematics, looking for anything I might have missed. By the 12-hour mark, my concern has evolved into something deeper. I initiate a full-spectrum scan, searching for any radio signals from Earth. Nothing. 12 hours since expected reacquisition, I record, unable to keep a slight tremor from my voice. No response on any channel. I've initiated every troubleshooting protocol in the manual, beginning to consider non-technical explanations. I pause, then add, ground systems failure seems unlikely across all redundant stations. Alternative hypothesis, major event has compromised Earth's communications infrastructure. The thought has been forming in the back of my mind for hours, but speaking it aloud makes it real. What could disable every ground station capable of communicating with Odyssey? The possibilities are few, and none are comforting. I train the high-resolution camera toward Earth, a small blue dot at this distance, but still visible. The image shows nothing unusual, but the resolution is insufficient to detect signs of large-scale disaster. Initiating scheduled rest period, I decide, will resume contact attempts after sleep cycle. Sleep doesn't come easily. I lie in my restraints, my mind racing through scenarios, most of them catastrophic. A global communications failure, a massive solar flare, or something worse. After 4 hours of fitful sleep, I return to my post. 24 hours have passed since expected reacquisition. According to mission protocols, this officially qualifies as a critical anomaly. 24-hour status update, I record. No contact established. Moving to contingency operations. The silence stretches out, punctuated only by the ambient hum of the spacecraft's systems. Silence. The silence has become oppressive. 48 hours since expected reacquisition, and still nothing from Earth. I've cycled through every emergency protocol, tested every communication system redundancy, and transmitted on every available frequency. The void remains empty, indifferent to my increasingly desperate calls. Houston, this is Odyssey, day 3 of communications anomaly, requesting immediate response on any channel. My voice sounds hollow in the confined space of the command module. I don't expect an answer anymore, but mission protocol demands I keep trying. I wait through the full 38-minute communication cycle. Nothing, as expected. My reflection in the darkened viewport looks haggard. Despite adhering to my scheduled rest periods, sleep has been elusive. The question that began as a whisper has grown into a scream in my mind. What happened to Earth? Initiating daily systems check, I announce to my mission log, grasping at routine to maintain my sanity. The spacecraft's automated diagnostics run through each critical system, all reporting nominal function. The Odyssey continues to perform flawlessly, exactly as designed. It's Earth that has fallen silent. I pull up the communication system schematics on my display for the 20th time, searching for anything I might have missed. The primary array, functional, backup systems, operational, power supply, nominal, alignment, precise. There's no technical explanation for the continued silence. Transitioning to contingency mission profile, I decide, forcing my voice to maintain its professional tone. Continuing orbital scientific observations while evaluating return options. The contingency protocols were designed for situations with temporary loss of communication. They specify continued orbital operations for 72 hours, followed by abort procedures if contact isn't reestablished. But those procedures assumed a functioning mission control waiting to resume contact, not whatever this situation represents. My training included psychological preparation for emergencies, but nothing specific for complete loss of contact with Earth. Dr. Patel's voice echoes in my memory. In any crisis situation, focus on the knowns, not the unknowns. Address the variables you can control. I take a deep breath and list the knowns. The Odyssey is fully functional. Life support systems are operating at optimal levels. I have sufficient supplies for the planned mission duration, plus a 1-month emergency margin. Mars orbit is stable. The scientific instruments are gathering valuable data. The unknowns are more troubling. What happened to Earth? Is the communication breakdown temporary or permanent? Are recovery systems still operational? Should I follow abort protocols and return on schedule, or remain in orbit longer in hopes of re-establishing contact? Activating long-range observation suite, I decide, directing the spacecraft's telescopic instruments toward Earth. The blue planet appears as little more than a bright point at this distance, but the Odyssey's high-resolution imaging system might detect large-scale changes. While the telescope calibrates, I return to the scientific mission. Whatever has happened to Earth, I still have responsibilities here. The data collection must continue. Beginning detailed spectroscopic analysis of Martian atmosphere, I record, activating the appropriate instruments. Initial readings show interesting concentrations of methane in the northern hemisphere. The work provides a welcome distraction, focusing my mind on concrete problems rather than troubling speculations. For several hours, I lose myself in the scientific procedures, methodically gathering and cataloging data about the red planet beneath me. When the long-range observation suite completes its calibration, I return to the Earth surveillance program. The telescope's imagery appears on my main display. Earth, a small blue crescent at this distance, due to the relative positions of our planets. Initiating maximum magnification and image enhancement, I say, typing the commands into the system. The image sharpens slightly, though atmospheric distortion limits the resolution. At first glance, everything appears normal, the familiar blue sphere with its swirling white cloud patterns. But as I apply various filtering algorithms, something catches my attention. Anomalous atmospheric patterns detected, I note, my voice tight. Applying contrast enhancement. The enhanced image reveals dark patches over portions of what should be North America and Europe, patterns inconsistent with normal cloud cover or seasonal variation. Their exact nature is difficult to determine at this distance. My heart races as I apply additional filters, trying to extract more detail from the limited data. Thermal imaging shows unusual hotspots and temperature variations. I record carefully. Nature and cause indeterminate at current resolution. I stare at the image, feeling a cold weight settling in my stomach. The patterns are unusual, concerning, but I can't draw definitive conclusions. Too many variables, too much distance, too little data. Computer, access mission archives, I command. Display last news update received before blackout. The screen fills with the final news summary, transmitted from Houston 3 days before the communications failure. International tensions were rising between the United States, Russia, and China, with additional concerns about North Korea's increasingly aggressive posture. Nothing that explicitly pointed to imminent conflict, but the signs were there for those who knew how to read them. Had they known? Had Houston suspected something might happen? Is that why the last transmission from Samantha included the unusual Godspeed, Commander Foster, instead of the standard sign-off? I shake my head, dismissing the thought. The mission planners couldn't have anticipated this. No one could have. Day 3 status update, I record. Still no contact with Earth. Observational data shows unusual atmospheric patterns of unknown origin. Continuing to gather data while evaluating options. The options are limited and stark. According to mission protocols, I should initiate abort procedures at the 72-hour mark, terminating the orbital mission and beginning the return journey. But return to what? If Earth has experienced some kind of catastrophic event, the recovery infrastructure might be compromised. I try to focus on the immediate tasks, but my mind keeps returning to the family photos on my console. My parents in Colorado, my sister and her family in Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. Are they safe? Do they think I'm dead, lost in space? Focus, I mutter to myself. Doctor, Patel's training echoing in my mind. Address the variables you can control. I call up the spacecraft's system status report, reviewing the life support parameters. The Odyssey carries supplies for the 8-month round trip, plus a 1-month emergency margin. If I follow abort protocols and begin the return journey now, I'll arrive at Earth in 4 months with adequate reserves. But what awaits me there? The observational data is concerning but inconclusive. I simply don't have enough information to determine what's happened. Extending high-gain antenna to maximum sensitivity, I decide, initiating the procedure. Scanning all frequencies for any Earth-based transmissions. If there are still functioning communication systems on Earth, I might detect their signals even if they can't reach me directly. The Odyssey's receiving systems are designed to pick up even faint transmissions from Earth-based deep space network dishes. While the scan runs, I force myself to eat a meal from the ship's stores. The food, a pasta with synthetic meat sauce, tastes like ash in my mouth, but I methodically consume it, knowing I need to maintain my physical condition. 4 hours later, the frequency scan completes its cycle. The result appears on my display, no coherent signals detected. Scan results negative, I record. No structured transmissions detected on any standard frequency. Some electromagnetic noise present, but insufficient for analysis. The implications sink in slowly. Whatever has happened has affected global communications infrastructure. But the exact nature and extent of the problem remains unclear. The electromagnetic noise could indicate anything from solar flare activity to partial technological functionality. I find myself talking to the photos on my console. Don't worry, I tell my sister's image. Julie's smart. She would have gotten the kids somewhere safe. The words sound hollow even to my own ears. Sleep eludes me during my scheduled rest period. I lie awake in my restraints, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through scenarios. By the time my alarm signals the end of the rest cycle, I've made a decision. Day 4 status update. I record. 72 hours since expected reacquisition. Mission protocols indicate abort and return at this point. However, given observed conditions on Earth, standard protocols may no longer apply. I take a deep breath before continuing. Decision: continue orbital mission as scheduled. Complete scientific objectives and gather additional intelligence on Earth's condition. Reassess return options at mission endpoint based on further observations. The decision violates mission protocols, but those protocols never anticipated this scenario. Completing the scientific mission gives me more time to gather data and potentially reestablish contact before committing to the return journey. I expand the Earth observation program, dedicating more of the spacecraft's resources to monitoring my home planet. The dark patches continue to evolve, spreading, shifting with atmospheric circulation. Their exact nature remains frustratingly ambiguous at this distance. Day 5 observational update. I record after another 24 hours of monitoring. Atmospheric anomalies continue to evolve. Interpretation remains inconclusive due to distance limitations and instrument constraints. My scientific training battles with my emotional response. Part of me wants to jump to conclusions, to define what I'm seeing, but the analytical part of my mind, the part that made me suitable for this mission, insists on maintaining objectivity in the face of limited data. Establishing quantitative baseline for ongoing Earth observation, I decide, setting up automated monitoring protocols. The computer will track changes in atmospheric patterns, temperature variations, and other measurable parameters, creating a dataset that can be analyzed over time. With the monitoring systems established, I force myself to return to the Mars orbital mission. Whatever has happened to Earth, I still have responsibilities here. The scientific objectives remain valid, perhaps even more important now. Resuming primary mission tasks, I record. Initiating detailed surface mapping of Acidalia Planitia region. The routine of scientific work provides a temporary respite from my darker thoughts. For several hours, I lose myself in the familiar procedures, capturing high-resolution imagery of the Martian surface, running spectroscopic analyses, measuring radiation levels. During a scheduled meal break, I find myself scrolling through the personal entertainment files loaded onto the spacecraft's computer. Among them is a documentary about global disaster scenarios produced in the 2030s. I hesitate, then open it. The program outlines various potential extinction-level events, asteroid impacts, supervolcano eruptions, pandemics, climate collapse, and nuclear war. Each scenario is analyzed dispassionately, with projected outcomes and survival possibilities. I close the file before finishing it. Speculation isn't helpful right now. I need to focus on what I know, not what I fear. Computer, access mission archives, I command. Display last personal messages received before blackout. The screen fills with video messages from my family. My father's stoic pride. My mother's barely concealed worry. My sister's cheerful updates about the kids. Recorded over a month ago, they feel like artifacts from another era. Day 6 status update, I record. 1/3 of primary orbital mission completed. Scientific data collection proceeding on schedule. Earth observations continue but remain inconclusive. I've fallen into a new routine. Half my time is devoted to the Mars orbital mission, gathering the scientific data that was the Odyssey's primary purpose. The other half is spent monitoring Earth, refining my observations, and searching for any signs of communication. During my next rest period, I dream of Colorado, the mountains behind my parents' home, the creek where I fished with my father, the garden my mother tended with obsessive care. In the dream, the landscape transforms, mountains crumbling, water turning black, plants withering under an ashen sky. I wake with tears on my face, something that hasn't happened since I was a child. Get it together, Foster, I mutter, wiping my face roughly. Emotional indulgence is a luxury I can't afford. Not now, not here, 50 million miles from home with only myself to rely on. The mission clock shows I've been in Mars orbit for 7 days, almost the complete planned duration of the orbital mission. Under normal circumstances, I would be preparing for departure in another 24 hours, firing the engines to break orbit and begin the long journey home. Day 7 mission assessment, I record. Primary scientific objectives 87% complete. Remaining tasks can be completed within next 24 hours. I pull up the return trajectory calculations, reviewing the parameters for the journey home. The computer has plotted the optimal path, minimizing fuel requirements while ensuring the fastest possible return. According to the calculations, the return journey will take approximately 4 months. 4 months to a planet that may no longer be as I left it. 4 months to prepare for whatever awaits me there. I turn back to the Earth monitoring suite, reviewing the latest observations. The atmospheric anomalies continue to evolve, shifting and spreading in patterns that defy easy interpretation. Without ground confirmation, I can only speculate on their cause and significance. Day 7 observational update, I record. Earth monitoring continues to show atmospheric anomalies. Nature and extent of surface conditions remain indeterminate at current distance and resolution. The data is frustratingly ambiguous. For every interpretation suggesting catastrophe, there are alternative explanations that might account for the observations. Solar flare effects, unusual but natural weather patterns, instrument artifacts. And yet, the complete communications silence is harder to explain away. Decision required, I mutter to myself. Complete orbital mission as planned and return to Earth, or remain at Mars to gather additional data? The mission protocols are clear. Once primary objectives are complete, return preparations should begin. But those protocols assumed a functioning mission control and recovery infrastructure. I pull up the life support calculations. The Odyssey carries supplies to support me for the planned 8-month mission, plus a 1-month emergency margin. If I remain at Mars beyond the planned orbital period, I'll be cutting into that emergency margin for the return journey. Risk assessment, I record, forcing myself to think through the options methodically. Remaining at Mars provides additional observational data, but reduces return journey safety margin. Immediate return maintains safety margin, but means facing uncertain Earth conditions sooner. I stare at the image of Earth on my display. The blue planet with its concerning atmospheric patterns, its complete radio silence. Primary mission objectives nearly complete. Scientific value of extended Mars orbit minimal compared to risk. Unknown conditions on Earth require conservative approach to life support reserves. The decision crystallizes. Day 7 mission decision. Complete remaining primary objectives within next 24 hours. Begin preparation for return journey as scheduled. With the decision made, I throw myself into the final mission tasks with renewed focus. The remaining scientific observations must be completed with the same precision and attention to detail as everything that came before. Initiating final observation sequence of Valles Marineris, I record, directing the high-resolution cameras toward the massive canyon system, capturing detailed topography for geological analysis. As I work, I find my thoughts constantly returning to Earth, to the family I left behind, to the civilization that sent me here, to the uncertain future that awaits my return. But I force myself to focus on the immediate tasks, one step at a time, complete the mission, prepare for return, face whatever comes after. Scientific observations 98% complete, I note after several hours of intensive work. Remaining tasks scheduled for completion within 4 hours. I begin the pre-departure checklist, verifying each of the spacecraft's systems for the return journey. The nuclear thermal engine that will push me back toward Earth shows optimal condition in all diagnostics. Life support systems report full functionality. Power generation remains stable. Pre-departure system verification 40% complete, I record. All checked systems nominal. During a scheduled break, I return to the Earth observation suite, checking for any changes in the patterns. The atmospheric disturbances remain prominent, shifting with global weather patterns. Still no radio signals detected on any frequency. I complete the system verification, confirming the Odyssey's readiness for the long journey home. The spacecraft has performed flawlessly throughout the mission, a testament to the engineers who designed and built her. Pre-departure checks complete, I announce to my log. All systems verified and nominal. Odyssey ready for Earth return. I schedule the departure burn for 0800 hours ship time the next morning, allowing myself one final rest period before beginning the return journey. The trajectory has been calculated and verified. The engine has been tested and primed, and all scientific data has been secured for transport. In my narrow bunk, I find sleep coming more easily than it has in days. The decision has been made, the uncertainty narrowed to manageable parameters. Whatever awaits me on Earth, I am returning to face it. My dreams are filled with images of Mars receding behind me, Earth growing larger in the viewport, and the faces of those I left behind, some clear, others obscured by shadow. I wake to the soft chime of my alarm, feeling more rested than I have since the communications failure began. Today, I leave Mars behind and begin the long journey home, to an Earth that may be forever changed, but is still the only home humanity has ever known. Day 8 mission log. I record as I complete my morning routine. Final departure preparations underway. Mars orbital mission objectives completed successfully. I move through the final checklist with methodical precision. Each system must be configured for the departure burn, each backup verified, each contingency anticipated. Engine preheating sequence initiated, I report. Power systems configured for maximum thrust. Navigation alignment verified. Mars fills my viewport one last time. The rust-colored world that has been my silent companion these past 8 days. I've accomplished what I came to do, gathering the scientific data that will expand human knowledge of our planetary neighbor. Now it's time to return home, regardless of what awaits me there. T-minus 5 minutes to departure burn, I announce. All systems nominal. The computer counts down the final seconds. Engine ignition in 3, 2, 1. The nuclear thermal engine roars to life, pushing me back into my seat as the Odyssey breaks free from Mars's gravitational embrace. The red planet begins to shrink in my viewport, receding into the blackness of space as I set course for Earth. Departure burn complete. I record as the engine shuts down on schedule. Trajectory confirmed. Odyssey en route to Earth. I watch Mars diminish to a reddish point of light among the stars. Ahead lies a 4-month journey through the void. And beyond that, an Earth whose condition remains one of the greatest unknowns I've ever faced. Return journey initiated. I speak into my log. Estimated arrival at Earth in 4 months, 3 days. Continuing observation during transit. The silence stretches around me, but it's different now. Purposeful rather than oppressive. I am no longer in holding pattern, waiting for contact that may never come. I am in motion, returning to face whatever awaits, with no certainty of what I'll find. In the vast emptiness between worlds, the Odyssey carries me home, perhaps the most isolated human in history, heading toward a planet where everything familiar may have changed beyond recognition. Homecoming. Earth grows larger in my viewport each day. After 4 months of solitary travel through the void, my home planet has transformed from a distant blue marble to a detailed sphere that fills my field of view. I should feel relief, excitement, even joy at the sight. Instead, I feel only a creeping dread. Day 120 of mission. Earth approach phase initiated. I record in my log. Distance from Earth, approximately 1 million kilometers. Estimated arrival in 36 hours. At this distance, there's no denying what I'm seeing. The Earth that sent me to Mars no longer exists. The planet's familiar blue has been muted by swirling gray-brown patterns that cover nearly the entire surface. The atmospheric contamination I first observed from Mars has evolved into a global phenomenon, seemingly worse than anything the models predicted during my training. Visual confirmation of widespread atmospheric disturbance. I state flatly for my log. My voice sounds strange in my ears. Too calm, too clinical for what I'm witnessing. Pattern and distribution consistent with aftermath of global nuclear exchange. I've had 4 months to prepare for this moment. 4 months of increasingly detailed observations as the Odyssey carried me homeward. Yet the reality before me still feels impossible, like a nightmare I can't wake from. I activate the spacecraft's telescope array, directing it toward North America. The image that appears on my display confirms my worst fears. The eastern seaboard of the United States, where Washington, D.C., New York, and other major cities once stood, shows multiple impact zones surrounded by vast areas of devastation. Similar patterns mark Western Europe, Russia, and parts of Asia. Conducting preliminary assessment of surface conditions, I continue, moving methodically through my approach checklist despite the horror unfolding before me. Training takes over when emotion becomes too much to bear. The instrument package gathers data as the Odyssey continues its approach: atmospheric composition, radiation levels, thermal readings. The numbers appear on my secondary display, each one telling part of the grim story. Atmospheric particulate levels elevated by factor of 850. Radiation readings indicate multiple ground zeros across all continents. Global temperature decrease of approximately 7.2 degrees Celsius from pre-mission baseline. Nuclear winter, far worse than the models predicted, beyond anything we feared during the Second Cold War. I force myself to breathe evenly, to focus on the immediate tasks rather than the devastating implications. The mission protocols never anticipated this specific scenario, but they did include contingency planning for compromised Earth recovery systems. Initiating autonomous return protocol, I decide. Computer, calculate optimal re-entry trajectory based on current Earth conditions. The system processes the command, evaluating atmospheric conditions, radiation levels, and geographical features to determine the safest approach path. Without ground support from Houston, the Odyssey must handle these calculations alone. Calculation complete, the computer announces. Optimal approach, Southern Hemisphere entry over Pacific. multiple potential landing zones identified with probability rankings. I review the suggested trajectories on my display. The computer has identified several potential landing areas, ranked by safety factors and proximity to what might have been surviving population centers. The highest-ranked option targets a splashdown in waters east of Australia. I study the data, but something doesn't feel right. The distance from the Australian coast to any potential landfall is significant, over 200 kilometers in most projected scenarios. If no recovery comes, if I need to make my own way to shore. Computer, calculate alternative trajectory for Atlantic approach with potential splashdown near Florida coast. Warning, Northern Hemisphere approach carries increased radiation exposure and atmospheric turbulence risk. The computer responds, acknowledged. Calculate anyway. While the computer works, I scan the telescope toward Florida. The coastline is still recognizable, though altered by what appear to be massive storm patterns and sea level changes. The peninsula has narrowed, portions of the southern tip seemingly submerged. Alternative trajectory calculated. The computer announces. Atlantic approach with potential landing zone approximately 20 kilometers east of former Cape Canaveral Space Center. Warning, radiation levels in region exceed recommended safety parameters. I weigh the options carefully. The Southern Hemisphere approach is safer in almost every measurable way. Lower radiation, less atmospheric disturbance, potentially more stable climate conditions. But the Florida approach puts me within swimming distance of shore if necessary, near the familiar territory of Kennedy Space Center where the mission began. More importantly, it's closer to where my family might have been. Colorado and Virginia were almost certainly targeted directly, but perhaps some people evacuated to Florida. The probability is minuscule, but it exists. Decision made, I announced to my log, selecting Atlantic approach with landing zone east of Florida coast, radiation exposure within acceptable emergency parameters for short-term exposure. The choice is partly practical, partly emotional. If no recovery comes, a 20-kilometer swim to shore is potentially survivable. A 200-kilometer journey to Australia is not. Initiating communications broadcast on all emergency frequencies, I announce, activating the system. This is Commander Alexander Foster of the Odyssey Mars mission, requesting contact with any functioning Earth station. I am approaching Earth and preparing for re-entry over the Atlantic. If anyone can hear this transmission, please respond. The silence that greets my transmission is expected, but still disheartening. After nearly 5 months without contact, I've grown used to the lack of response. But some small part of me had hoped that as I drew closer to Earth, someone might answer. T-minus 30 hours to re-entry decision point, I note in my log, continuing observation and data collection to refine approach strategy. I divide the remaining time before re-entry into structured analysis periods, methodically gathering data about the Florida coast, evaluating radiation levels, atmospheric conditions, and searching for any signs of human activity. What I find is increasingly troubling. Surface temperatures in Florida have dropped dramatically from pre-mission norms, now resembling those of pre-war Maine or southern Canada. Vegetation patterns are barely detectable through the persistent cloud cover. But what I can see suggests massive die-offs. The coastline itself has been reshaped by what must have been catastrophic storms in the aftermath of the nuclear exchange. As I work, I steal occasional glances at the family photos on my console. My parents in Colorado, my sister and her family near Washington, D.C. The cold probability calculations running through my head place their survival chances at 0, but I push those thoughts aside. There's no room for personal grief, not when my own survival remains uncertain. T-minus 24 hours to re-entry, I record after completing another analysis cycle. Florida coast shows significant environmental alteration, no evidence of functioning infrastructure or organized human activity detected. I focus the telescope on the former site of Kennedy Space Center, searching for any recognizable landmarks. The launch complexes appear to be gone, either destroyed in the initial exchange or eroded by the violent weather patterns that followed. The vehicle assembly building, once one of the largest structures in the world, is no longer visible. No evidence of operational recovery capability at former NASA facilities, I note, the professional tone of my voice masking the hollow feeling in my chest. Proceeding with autonomous re-entry plan. As Earth continues to grow in my viewport, I face the most significant decision of the mission. The original flight plan called for multiple re-entry options, with global recovery teams standing by. Now, I must commit to a single approach path with no expectation of recovery. Decision point reached, I announced to my log after reviewing all available data. Selected approach path targets waters approximately 20 kilometers east of former Cape Canaveral. Region shows severe impact, but offers shortest distance to potential landfall if self-recovery becomes necessary. With the decision made, I begin the final re-entry preparations. Each step follows precise protocols developed over decades of spaceflight experience, but never before tested under these exact circumstances. T-minus 12 hours to re-entry, configuring spacecraft for atmospheric insertion. I power down non-essential systems, secure all loose equipment, and verify the life support reserves for potential post-landing contingencies. If no recovery arrives after splashdown, the Odyssey's command module is designed to float indefinitely, supporting me for up to 10 days with careful conservation. Initiating final communications attempt on all frequencies, I broadcast. This is Commander Alexander Foster of the Odyssey mission. I am preparing for re-entry approximately 20 kilometers east of the Florida coast. Estimated splashdown in 12 hours. If anyone receives this message, please respond with available recovery capabilities. The silence continues, unbroken. T-minus 6 hours to re-entry. I record after completing another cycle of preparations. All systems configured for atmospheric insertion, beginning pre-re-entry rest period. Sleep is impossible, but I force myself to lie in my restraints with closed eyes, conserving energy for the demanding process ahead. The Odyssey hums around me, systems running at minimal power, carrying me inexorably toward a home that no longer exists as I knew it. My thoughts drift to the Academy training simulations, the countless re-entry drills in environments ranging from ideal to catastrophic. None of them included returning to post-nuclear Earth with no ground support as a scenario. T-minus 2 hours to re-entry, I announce, strapping myself into the command seat after my rest period. Initiating final approach sequence. I activate the necessary systems, bringing the spacecraft back to full operational status. The displays light up around me, showing approach trajectory, atmospheric conditions, and system status readings. Alignment thrusters firing, positioning Odyssey for optimal re-entry angle. The spacecraft shivers slightly as the small thrusters fire, rotating us into the precise orientation required for atmospheric insertion. Too steep an angle, and the heat shield could fail. Too shallow, and I'll skip off the atmosphere back into space. Alignment complete. Re-entry angle locked at 38.7 degrees. Optimal trajectory confirmed. Earth fills my entire view now, the damaged blue sphere that has been humanity's only home for our entire existence. Whatever has happened, whatever awaits me below, this is still where I belong. T-minus 30 minutes to atmospheric entry. Heat shield activation complete. All systems nominal. The final half hour passes in a blur of instrument checks and minor trajectory adjustments. I've done everything possible to prepare. Now physics takes over. Beginning atmospheric entry sequence. Communications blackout expected in approximately 2 minutes. As the Odyssey encounters the first wisps of Earth's upper atmosphere, the temperature around the heat shield begins to rise. Soon, an envelope of superheated plasma will surround the spacecraft, cutting off all radio communication until I reach lower altitudes. Entering communications blackout now. If anyone is receiving, expect resumption of signal in approximately 6 minutes. The spacecraft begins to shudder as the atmosphere thickens around it. The temperature readings for the heat shield climb rapidly, though still within design parameters. I'm pushed back into my seat as deceleration forces build, reaching nearly 4G at peak intensity. Outside my viewport, the darkness of space gives way to an angry orange glow as the atmosphere burns around the heat shield. The vibration intensifies, rattling the command module as the Odyssey plunges deeper into the thickening air. Heat shield, performing within parameters. I grunt against the pressure on my chest. Deceleration forces peaking, now. The crushing weight begins to ease as the spacecraft slows. The fiery glow outside the viewport fades, replaced by an eerie gray-brown daylight as the Odyssey descends below the plasma layer. Exiting communications blackout, I report, though I still expect no response. Altitude 40,000 meters and descending, all systems nominal. I can see the ocean below me now, the vast expanse of the Atlantic stretching to the horizon. The water appears darker than I remember, with strange patterns visible on the surface. Perhaps the result of changed circulation patterns or contamination. Drogue chute deployment in 3, 2, 1. Deploy. A small jolt runs through the spacecraft as the initial stabilizing parachute deploys, further slowing the Odyssey and keeping it oriented correctly for the main chute sequence. Drogue functioning normally, preparing for main chute deployment at 10,000 meters. The altimeter counts down steadily as the spacecraft continues its descent. 25,000 meters, 20,000 meters, 15,000 meters. Each passing kilometer brings me closer to whatever world awaits below. Main chute deployment sequence initiating now.
A stronger jolt rocks the command module as the main parachutes deploy, unfurling in the turbulent air and dramatically slowing the spacecraft's descent. Through my viewport, I can see the massive canopies billowing above, their red and white panels stark against the gray-brown sky.
Main chutes deployed successfully. Descent rate nominal, altitude 8,000 meters, and descending. As the Odyssey drifts downward, I catch my first clear glimpse of the Florida coastline. What I see confirms my worst fears. The lush green peninsula I remember has been transformed into a barren landscape. The coastline is jagged and unfamiliar, reshaped by devastating storms. No roads are visible, no buildings, no signs of human presence. Visual confirmation of severe environmental alteration. I report to my log. Florida Peninsula appears devoid of vegetation or infrastructure. The final minutes of descent pass with methodical precision. Each system performs exactly as designed, guiding the Odyssey toward its landing zone in the waters off what was once Cape Canaveral. Altitude 1,000 meters, preparing for splashdown. All systems configured for water landing. The ocean surface rushes up to meet me. I brace for impact, holding tight to the restraints. Contact! The Odyssey hits the water with a tremendous splash, bobbing heavily before stabilizing. The impact is jarring, but well within tolerance. After nearly 5 months in space, I have returned to Earth. Splashdown confirmed. I report to my log and any receivers that might be listening. Time is 14:32 ship clock. Position approximately 22 kilometers east of former Florida coast. Command module floating stably, all systems transitioning to post-landing configuration. I begin the post-landing checklist, powering down flight systems while maintaining life support, communications, and emergency beacons. The Odyssey's command module has transformed from a spacecraft to a floating life raft. Activating emergency locator beacons on all frequencies, I announce, initiating the system. Broadcasting position coordinates continuously. Through my viewport, I can see only ocean and sky. The cloud cover is heavy, thicker and darker than normal, the color unnatural, a perpetual twilight of brown-gray that filters the sunlight to a sickly hue. The water appears oily and strange, nothing like the vibrant blue of the Atlantic I remember. Post-landing assessment complete. I record after cycling through all systems. Command module integrity maintained. No water ingress detected. Life support functioning normally on internal power. External radiation levels elevated, but within short-term exposure parameters. Now comes the waiting. If anyone received my transmissions, if recovery capability still exists, someone should be coming for me. I settle in to wait, monitoring communications channels and scanning the horizon for any approaching vessels. Hours pass with no sign of human activity. I maintain the discipline of regular status updates, monitor the spacecraft's systems, and watch the horizon for any approaching vessels. The sea remains empty, the sky vacant of aircraft. 6 hours post-splashdown, I record as the light begins to fade outside. No contact established. No visual confirmation of recovery assets. All systems remain functional. Beginning power conservation, measures for extended floating duration. As darkness falls, I scan the horizon for lights, for any sign of human presence on the distant shore. Nothing breaks the perfect darkness. No cities, no towns, not even the flicker of a solitary campfire. The night passes slowly. I manage a few hours of restless sleep, waking frequently to check systems and scan the horizon. The module's gentle rocking on the ocean swells becomes almost comforting, a reminder that I'm no longer isolated in the void of space, even if I am now isolated on a planetary scale. Dawn brings improved visibility, but no sign of rescue or human activity. The coastline is now visible as a thin line on the western horizon, perhaps 20 kilometers away, as estimated. The morning light reveals more details of the transformed landscape. Barren, gray, lifeless. 24 hours post-splashdown, I report. No contact established. Command module functioning nominally. Beginning assessment of self-rescue options. The Odyssey's command module includes a small inflatable raft for emergency evacuation, designed as a last resort if the module itself becomes compromised. With basic supplies and a hand-operated desalination device, I could potentially reach the Florida coast, though the journey would take time and carry significant risks. Continuing standard broadcast and observation for another 12 hours before implementing self-rescue protocol, I decide, unwilling to abandon the relative safety of the command module unless absolutely necessary. I spend the day monitoring systems, scanning the horizon, and inventorying supplies. The module carries food and water for 10 days at minimum consumption rates, longer if I implement strict rationing. Power reserves can maintain life support and basic communications for approximately 30 days. As the second night approaches, my hopes for conventional recovery have completely faded. No one is coming. If I want to set foot on Earth again, I'll need to make my own way to shore. 36 hours post-splashdown, I record as darkness falls again, no contact established, implementing self-rescue protocol at first light. I prepare the emergency raft and survival supplies, carefully selecting what to take and what to leave behind. The scientific data from Mars, stored on hardened drives designed to withstand extreme conditions, goes into a waterproof container. A few personal items, including the family photos from my console, join them. The rest must stay behind. The second night passes with fitful sleep. I dream of Colorado mountains turned to ash, of my sister's neighborhood in Virginia reduced to radioactive crater. I wake repeatedly, sweating despite the module's carefully regulated temperature. As the first gray light of dawn appears through my viewport, I make the final preparations for departure. Day 3 post-splashdown, initiating self-rescue protocol, I record, deploying emergency raft and transferring essential supplies. Command module systems will remain active with automated distress beacon. I open the Odyssey's hatch for the first time since splashdown. The air that rushes in is shocking, cold, damp, with an acrid taste I can't identify. My environmental sensors show elevated radiation and particulate levels, but within the survival parameters for limited exposure. I deploy the raft according to procedure, securing it alongside the floating command module while I transfer supplies. The small inflatable craft seems impossibly fragile compared to the Odyssey's protective shell, but it represents my only chance to reach land. Final command module status update. I record before departing. All automated systems functioning. Emergency beacon active. If recovery becomes available, command module coordinates are logged in continuous transmission. With a last look at the spacecraft that has been my home for 5 months, I climb carefully into the raft. The transition is awkward, my muscles still adjusting to Earth gravity after the long mission. Once aboard, I secure the survival pack and navigation equipment, then release the tether connecting me to the Odyssey. Self-rescue initiated, I log using the portable recorder. Estimated journey to Florida coast, 8 to 10 hours depending on current and wind conditions. The raft drifts away from the command module, carried by the ocean current. I deploy the collapsible paddles and begin to row, establishing a steady rhythm that I can maintain for hours if necessary. The distant coastline serves as my navigation point, though I correct occasionally using the compass to maintain a westward heading. As I row, I observe the changed world around me. The water contains strange debris, not the plastic pollution of the pre-war world, but organic matter unlike anything I recognize. Occasionally, dead fish float past, their forms oddly distorted. The sky remains a uniform gray-brown, the sun a dim smudge trying to penetrate the atmospheric contamination. Hours pass as I make slow but steady progress toward the shore. The physical exertion is challenging after months in space, despite my rigorous in-flight exercise program. My muscles burn, my hands blister, but I maintain the rowing rhythm with military discipline. Approximately halfway to shore, I record during a brief rest period. No observable signs of human activity or infrastructure on visible coastline. As I draw nearer to land, I can make out more details of the transformed landscape. The beaches that once defined Florida's coastline have been replaced by rocky, irregular shores. Inland, where lush vegetation once grew, only barren ground remains. The entire visible landscape appears devoid of life. No trees, no birds, nothing moving except the waves against the shore. After nearly 9 hours of rowing, the raft finally scrapes against the rocky bottom near the shore. I'm still about 50 meters from dry land, but the water here is shallow enough to wade. I secure the essential supplies in waterproof containers, strap them to my back, and carefully step out of the raft into the cold Atlantic. The water reaches my chest at its deepest point, then gradually recedes as I trudge toward shore. The bottom is uneven, scattered with debris and unidentifiable objects that catch at my feet. Finally, after what seems an eternity, I step onto the land of Earth for the first time in over 5 months. I stand on the shore of what was once Florida, the only human being in sight, perhaps the only one for thousands of miles. The landscape around me bears no resemblance to the vibrant state I remember. The ground is a grayish black, covered with a fine ash that shifts with each step. No vegetation is visible, not even the hardiest weeds or grasses. Landfall achieved, I record, my voice sounding small against the vast emptiness. Position estimated at former Cape Canaveral area. No observable signs of human presence or survival. I survey the desolate landscape, trying to orient myself. In the distance, perhaps a kilometer inland, I can make out the ruins of what might have been buildings, concrete foundations, and twisted metal frameworks, stripped of everything else by the forces that reshaped this world. Using the sun's position as a guide, I begin walking inland toward the ruins. My spacesuit's integrated environmental protection will shield me from the worst of the radiation and particulate exposure, but I'll need to find shelter before nightfall. The walking is difficult on the unstable ground. With each step, clouds of fine ash rise around my feet, coating my suit with gray dust. Nothing lives here. No insects buzz, no birds call, no small animals scurry away at my approach. The silence is as complete as space itself, but somehow more disturbing. After 40 minutes of walking, I reach the ruins I spotted from the shore. They appear to be the remains of a coastal community, perhaps Cocoa Beach or Cape Canaveral itself, though it's impossible to be certain. Nothing remains but foundations and partial wall structures, everything above ground level having been torn away by whatever combination of blast, fire, and storm reshaped this region. Investigating potential shelter location, I record, picking my way through the ruins. Structures severely compromised, limited protection value. I search methodically, looking for any space that might offer protection from the elements and radiation. Eventually, I find a partially intact basement area where 2 concrete walls and part of a ceiling remain standing. It's not ideal, but it's the best option in the immediate vicinity. Temporary shelter established, I note, setting down my supplies in the relatively protected corner of the ruins, beginning assessment of local conditions and resources. Using the portable environmental analyzer from my survival kit, I take readings of the air, soil, and nearby standing water. The results are grim, but not immediately lethal. Radiation elevated, but survivable in the short term. Air quality poor, but breathable. Water contaminated, but potentially treatable with my filtration equipment. As the day wears on, I establish a rudimentary camp in my concrete shelter. The survival kit provides enough food for approximately 2 weeks at minimum consumption, and the water purifier can make the contaminated groundwater drinkable, though it tastes metallic and strange. I set up the solar charger for my communication equipment, though I have little hope anyone will receive my transmissions. Still, protocol demands I try. Emergency broadcast on all frequencies, I transmit. This is Commander Alexander Foster, NASA Odyssey mission. I have made landfall at approximately the former Cape Canaveral location. If anyone receives this message, please respond. The silence that answers is expected, but still disappointing. I continue with the necessary survival tasks, securing my shelter as best I can before darkness falls. Night comes early through the contaminated atmosphere, the dim sun disappearing behind the western horizon. Without artificial lighting, the darkness is nearly complete. I activate a single low-power LED from my survival kit, casting just enough light to see my immediate surroundings. In the quiet darkness, the reality of my situation finally settles over me completely. I have returned to an Earth transformed beyond recognition by humanity's final act of self-destruction. No one is coming to find me. No civilization awaits my return. I may well be the last human being alive, the sole witness to the end of our species' long journey. Day 1 on Earth. I record softly in the darkness. No contact with human survivors. Long-term survival prospects uncertain. I spend that first night planning, analyzing, calculating probabilities. My training included wilderness survival, and the Odyssey mission included contingency preparations for emergency landings in remote areas. But nothing prepared me for this, surviving on a planet where the entire biosphere has been catastrophically disrupted. Morning brings no change to the desolate landscape. I emerge from my shelter to scan the horizon in all directions. Nothing moves except dust devils stirred by the wind. No animals, no people, no signs of life whatsoever. I establish a methodical search pattern, expanding outward from my shelter in increasing circles. Each day, I explore a new sector, looking for anything useful, untouched buildings, supplies, signs of other survivors. Each day, I return to my concrete shelter empty-handed. A week passes. My rations remain adequate, but I find no food sources to supplement them. Without plants or animals, without functioning ecosystems, the Earth has become as inhospitable as Mars, perhaps more so, given the radiation and atmospheric contamination. Day 7 on Earth. I record in my evening log. Continued search pattern yields no evidence of survivors or usable resources. Communications attempts remain unanswered. I stare at the family photos I brought from the Odyssey, faded now from exposure to the elements, despite my efforts to protect them. My parents smiling from their backyard in Colorado. My sister and her children outside their Virginia home. All gone, along with the world they inhabited. Yet I continue. Each morning, I wake and continue my search. Each evening, I return to my shelter and broadcast on all frequencies, hoping someone, somewhere, might be listening. The routine provides structure, purpose, a reason to continue in a world emptied of meaning. On the 10th day, I find it, half buried in ash and debris, about 5 kilometers from my shelter. A reinforced emergency bunker, partially collapsed, but with its heavy steel door still intact. Military design, likely associated with the Cape Canaveral launch facilities. Investigating potential long-term shelter, I record, examining the bunker exterior. Structure appears designed for nuclear contingency scenarios. The door is sealed, its electronic security system long dead. It takes hours of work with improvised tools to force it open enough to slip inside. What I find exceeds my most optimistic expectations. The bunker was designed for extended occupation, 6 months minimum for a small team, according to the documentation I find inside. Most perishable supplies have degraded, but the water recycling system remains partially functional. Solar backup power systems could potentially be repaired. Most importantly, the radiation shielding remains intact, offering protection far superior to my concrete ruins. Located viable long-term shelter. I update my log. Resource assessment ongoing. Survival prospects improved. I spend the next 3 days transferring my equipment to the bunker and inventorying its contents. The facility was clearly abandoned in haste. Personal effects remain scattered throughout, though I find no human remains. Perhaps the occupants evacuated, or perhaps they simply never made it to the bunker when the end came. The communications equipment is more powerful than my portable unit, though it shows no signs of having received transmissions in months. Still, I repair what I can and establish a regular broadcast schedule, sending my position and status every 6 hours. Secure in my new shelter with improved resources and protection, I face the fundamental question that has lurked since my return. What now? What purpose remains for the last astronaut on a dead Earth? The answer comes to me as I sort through the scientific data I brought back from Mars. This information, gathered at such cost, carried so far, represents perhaps the last contribution to human knowledge. Even if no one remains to receive it, it deserves to be preserved. Mission reassessment, I record, 2 weeks after landfall, establishing primary objective, documentation, and preservation. I set up a makeshift laboratory in one section of the bunker, using equipment both from my survival kit and salvage from the facility. Here, I begin the methodical process of analyzing my Mars data, comparing it with observations of Earth's current condition, creating a comprehensive record of both worlds. If other survivors exist, if human civilization continues in some form beyond my perception, this information might someday prove valuable. If not, it stands as testimony. Our species reached Mars before we destroyed ourselves. We touched another world before we ruined our own. Days blend into weeks. I establish a sustainable routine in the bunker, carefully managing resources, continuing my documentation work, and maintaining regular communication attempts. The solitude is complete, but not unfamiliar after my months alone in space. I was selected for the Odyssey mission, partly for my ability to function in isolation, a trait that now serves me in this most extreme circumstance. A month after my return to Earth, I complete a preliminary assessment of long-term survival prospects. The bunker can sustain me for perhaps a year with careful management. Beyond that, the fundamental problem remains without a functioning biosphere, without plants to produce oxygen and food, without functioning ecosystems. The Earth has become as inhospitable as any planet in our solar system. Long-term survival assessment. Challenging, but not immediately impossible, I record, continuing to broadcast position and status in case other survivors exist beyond detectable range. I establish a small memorial in one corner of the bunker, the family photos from the Odyssey, arranged beside items left behind by the bunker's previous occupants. A remembrance of humanity, of what we were before the end came. Each evening, I stand outside the bunker, regardless of the weather, watching the sun set through the contaminated atmosphere. The sunsets are strangely beautiful in this ruined world. Vivid streaks of orange and purple created by the very particles that make the air dangerous to breathe. In these quiet moments, I often think about the perspective I gained from Mars, seeing Earth as a fragile blue marble in the vastness of space. From 50 million miles away, our planet looked perfect, unmarred by the divisions and conflicts that eventually destroyed it. If only everyone could have shared that perspective, perhaps things would have been different. 2 months after landfall, something changes. During my evening communications broadcast, after weeks of unbroken silence, I detect a faint signal, barely perceptible, inconsistent, but definitely artificial. It's too weak to determine content or origin, and it fades before I can establish any meaningful contact. Detected potential artificial signal. I record, excitement creeping into my voice despite my efforts at scientific detachment. Source and nature undetermined. Signal strength insufficient for content analysis. The detection renews my determination. I spend days improving the bunker's communications array, scavenging parts from nearby ruins, extending the antenna height. The signal does not repeat immediately, but I maintain constant monitoring, unwilling to miss any potential contact. Another week passes before I detect it again, stronger this time, though still fragmentary. The transmission appears to be automated, a repeating pattern rather than directed communication. I cannot determine its source with my limited equipment, but its mere existence suggests I may not be alone after all. Second detection of artificial signal. I update my log. Estimated origin, uncertain, potentially orbital. Signal characteristics suggest automated transmission rather than direct communication. The possibility of an orbital source raises new questions. Could some space infrastructure have survived the catastrophe? An automated satellite or space station continuing to function after its controllers perished? Or perhaps, most tantalizing of all, other survivors in orbit, cut off from Earth as completely as I was at Mars. I focus my efforts on improving communication capabilities, working methodically to boost my transmission power and reception sensitivity. The work provides purpose, direction, a concrete goal beyond mere survival in a dead world. 3 months after my return to Earth, still alone but sustained by the possibility of contact, I stand outside the bunker at sunset. The contaminated sky paints spectacular colors across the barren landscape, beauty emerging from devastation. In this desolate quiet, on a planet transformed by humanity's final failure, I remain. The last astronaut, the solitary observer, the unintended survivor of our species' greatest accomplishment and its ultimate mistake. Whether the faint signals represent other survivors or merely the echoes of what we once were, I will continue to listen, to document, to persist. Not because I expect rescue or restoration, but because bearing witness has become my final mission. Earth continues its eternal orbit, carrying its solitary human passenger through the void. And I continue my own mission to survive, to record, to remember what we were and what we lost. The sun sets on another day in the silent world, and I return to my shelter, alone with the memories of 2 planets and the knowledge that I have truly come home, even if home is no longer what it was.
Every story has an end, but there's always another waiting to be told. Subscribe to Steve's Stories for more sci-fi, dystopian, and war-driven adventures, from short tales to full novels. Like the video, hit the bell, and join me on this journey through worlds unknown.